Welcome back to the Chicagolandians, a casual Chicago sports podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Cunningham, joined by my co-host, Conor Cunningham.
We're two brothers from the Chicagoland area talking about the latest and greatest in Chicago sports news.
Welcome back to another episode of the Chicagolandians. I'm your host, Patrick Cunningham, joined as always by Conor Cunningham. Whoop! Hello. On today's episode, we're going to be covering some of the recent news within the NFL and the Bears landscape and the Chicago landscape. But more importantly, we're going to be highlighting Conor's spectacular weekend where he completed the 2024 Bank of America Chicago Marathon. Walking through what that even looks like, what goes into running a marathon, why he did it, how he did it, and what's next for our spectacular co-host. Conor, you excited?
Excited, man. 26.2 of them things. Excited to talk about it.
That last 0.2 is what everyone forgets about, but you can't forget.
You still got to run it. You
still got to run it. It's invalid if you don't get that 0.2. They make you run it,
yeah.
Yep. But before we get into the marathon talk, we got some Bears news to talk about. We got some Bears, we got some Bulls, we got some Illini football news to talk about, and some Jets news? Question mark? What?
We got news.
But the first thing on the docket is we have the Bears beat the Jaguars 35-16 in London. We now move to 4-2. This game, we actually did not get the chance to watch it because we were watching Conor dominate the Chicago Marathon, but we did see some passing highlights. And then after the game, I watched the NFL's review of the game, and it looked pretty good. Williams finished the day 23 for 29 for 226, threw 4 touchdowns and 1 interception. It was a pretty bad ball. DJ Moore should have been, honestly, a bad touchdown.
Bad throw. Beefed it.
Oh, yeah, major beef. But other than that, this team is really starting to look like we're firing on all of the cylinders, maybe more than all of the cylinders. We're looking good. Obviously, we're beating up on bad teams, but you'd rather beat up on bad teams than get beat up by bad teams. Am I right?
Hey, we don't make the schedule. I guess the schedule is based off of our performance of last year, but, you know, we're playing the teams that we're playing, and we're looking good at them. Yeah, of course, you wouldn't want us to be playing bad against the Jaguars. You know, 2 cat teams that we've faced now. So we've lost to the Texans and Colts, have beaten now the Rams, Jags, and Panthers. So I guess if we had beaten the Colts, that would have been 4 straight 4-legged teams that we had beaten. Kind of interesting to see the remaining cat teams, how we'll play against them. Something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, but we looked good. Cole Kmet had 5 catches for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. He broke out the baseball celebration in London. Maybe introduced
Bengals,
a couple
other four-legged cat teams. Bengals.
Yeah, we got a lot of 4-legged people coming up. Kmet, 2 touchdowns, 5 for 70. DeAndre Swift, his 3rd straight game, I think, with over 100 total scrimmage yards.
Swift is here. Through 2 weeks, he looked terrible. Caleb Williams is outrushing him through 2 weeks, which, red flag.
Panic.
That's not a green flag for Caleb Williams. That is a red flag for the rushing attack. DeAndre Swift looked horrendous. Last 3 weeks, he must have just been scrolling Twitter for hours on end, just seeing all the scrubs calling him some explicit language, some explicit words, calling him soft, and he was just eating all of that. Swift looks great now. He looks dynamic, fast, explosive, and angry. Loving what I'm seeing from Swift. Granted, and we could say this for the last 3 games, not great defenses, but he's had real problems with vision in the past, not being able to see the holes or find the holes even if they're there. But he's looked better out in space. I feel like he's been more decisive and hitting holes harder. And he had a couple good cutbacks this game too, where it felt like he was making opportunity when it wasn't there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another big takeaway is the offense in general is really starting to look better.
Yeah.
I don't know what has changed with Waldron's play calling, but the offense in general seems more creative. I think back to that first touchdown we had to Cole Kmet, where we had a circle motion with Keenan Allen rotating over, rotates back, fake to Keenan Allen, fake to DeAndre Swift, then finally throws to Cole Kmet for a touchdown. That was a Matt Nagy looking play. That was like
beautiful looking play.
Year one Matt Nagy.
In a good way.
Offense.
In a good
yes.
way. Yeah.
Yes. And then Cole turned around and long snapped the extra point for that touchdown. Pretty cool series of events. But Connor, what do you think has changed with the offense in these past couple weeks that's now starting to click?
Well, I will say with that double screen play, old passing coordinators, fake screen, turn to the other side, they throw that screen. They say, fake screen here, let's go screen the other way. They're not going to expect it. Kind of an evolution of Shane Waldron faking that screen again to Cole Kmet down the middle of the field. I think it's just the team getting more comfortable with each other, getting more reps. Everyone says it, but preseason is kind of out the window now, so you just don't get you don't hit the ground running when the season starts. I think that Shane Waldron has also stopped being so cute. A lot of people were talking about the scripting that he was doing for the games, where he would just have an early down play sheet that he would pick plays from and wouldn't script the first 15 plays. And DJ Moore said that he had never been on a team in the NFL that hadn't done that before. So he cut the crap and is just scripting the first 15 plays, which I think is pretty standard. On the goal line, we all saw how terrible that option play was with the Colts. And then that seemed like a turning point for Shane Waldron, where now he just puts Doug Kramer in the backfield, Roshan Johnson, and just runs it down the middle. That play has been automatic this season. Our goal line has been a lot more effective after that Colts game. So I think overall it's just players getting more comfortable, the line having more synergy, just getting more time playing with each other. I think Matt Pryor has been playing pretty decent as well. Shout out to Q again. He's been doing a lot of good coverage on Matt Pryor. You still see that he's very much a power guy, but overall the line seems to be playing more cohesively now, especially with Nate Davis not there. So I think a lot of components are starting to come together, and the talent is really just starting to show through. Cole Kmet has totally taken over as the primary tight end, no more Gerald Everett stuff. Again, an example of Shane Waldron being too cute with his personnel, with having DeAndre Carter out there, Tyler Scott out there. A lot of the personnel packages have been reduced to primarily just our studs that we have and just letting the talent show through. So all those things inclusively can point to a more successful offense. And obviously, lighter competition, maybe less of a pass rush, but Caleb Williams has looked better against the pressure in general. But it's been encouraging for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I was doing some research this morning and looking at power rankings because I was curious how being 4-2 but having such an easy schedule, what the NFL or the consensus rankings are. The highest I saw was NFL.com put us at 13. Pretty good, especially I remember preseason and after weeks 1 and 2 seeing us in high 10s, like 19 or even mid 20s. Seeing now at 13 is pretty exciting. And then what also stood out to me, those Commanders. Every list I saw, they were between 7 and 10. I don't think I saw anyone put them outside the top 10, which is exciting because the next game is against the Commanders, Jaden Daniels.
This will be a great game.
That is going to be an exciting game. And that is a game that you're going to want to stay off of Twitter for, I think, because you're going to be seeing Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams comparisons the entire day and probably for the next week after that game. But that'll be really a statement game that I'm incredibly excited for. Connor, you looking forward to that one?
Yeah, for sure. I think the Commanders are a solid team. Their offense is really talented. Their defense isn't great, but when you score 40 points a game, you can really make up for a lot of problems they have on defense. So I think that's going to be a really exciting game to watch. Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels appear to have been playing as they expected to. We expected them to. They both look awesome. So I think that's going to be a super fun game. But just to hit on the schedule again, teams drop games all the time. The NFL is the best example of any given Sunday. The Cardinals, who just got ran by the Packers, beat the 49ers last week. The Rams beat the 49ers this season as well. Teams drop games all the time to worse opponents. So it's good that the Bears are playing these worse opponents as they should and handling business. These are still professional NFL teams that we're seeing out there. I think this production you can't just dismiss. I think 15-ish is a good spot for the Bears. I don't think we're a top 10 team right now, or we don't have the resume to make us a top 10 team. But I still think 4-2, you have to put some respect on it.
In other news for Chicago sports, we have the Bulls have started our preseason journey. We're currently 1-2. Not too much to take away from our preseason first couple games. I think this is going to be pretty rough. Bulls roster we have that is maybe looking to acquire one Cooper Flagg. But I think something that is exciting is Lonzo Ball is expected to make his return to the basketball court tomorrow, October 16th, against the Timberwolves, I believe. And this is his first time playing since missing 2 straight NBA seasons.
That's crazy.
despite being paid, I think, $25 million each year, he's going to play again tomorrow for the first time. I thought Lonzo Ball was never going to play again. Missing 2 years in a row seemed almost impossible to come back from. And you get a little nervous what that time off is going to do to you. Think of Deshaun Watson missing 600 games, 600 days of football, and seeing how he's, never come back. But it's exciting to see him come back. Lonzo Ball, during that 2021 season, he was really the glue guy, him and Caruso, for that whole team. Great defender, great facilitator. Very exciting to have him back. He's a fun player to watch. Very excited to have him back. He's a super fun player.
Now, Pat, if you had to guess, how old is Lonzo Ball? This will blow your mind, I think.
25.
Oh, never mind. Okay. He's currently 26, so
really?
He's 26.
Okay.
Which is younger than I expected it to be. He's been in this league for a while now, but he's going to be turning 27 this year. Still plenty of career that he could have left, right? Now, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but with the return of Lonzo Ball and the presence of Zach LaVine, who has not been traded yet, we now have Balzac, which is at least somewhat encouraging and something that we can build momentum off of. So something to keep an eye on. We'll see if there's going to be new additions to that.
So we have Modest Buzelis. We could do my Balzac.
My Balzac. That's actually pretty good.
Pretty good.
Booze Balzac. Yeah, that's, you know what? We could really workshop that, but I think it's a good point. But super excited to have Lonzo Ball back. He was a guy that came to the Bulls from the Pelicans. There was all this talk about him being so Hollywood, being UCLA, going to the Lakers, and then having kind of a fallen star moment coming down to New Orleans to be with the Pelicans. But then when he came to the Bulls, he was such a hard worker. He reworked his jump shot. He was a tenacious defender and really was glue for the Bulls team. So it's super exciting to have Lonzo Ball come back. Really excited to see him play.
Not super excited for the season, but it is just nice to see that we're moving in the right direction with Lonzo. In other news, we have Illinois football this weekend defeated the Purdue Boilermakers 50-49 in overtime. Absolute nail biter. Now, if you told me preseason Illinois plays Purdue and 100 points are scored in that game, I would say, pinch me.
GTFO.
Pinch me. GTFO. Wake me up from this dream. Are you kidding me? Could not believe that this game had so many points scored, especially considering we were up, I think, over 20 points at one point in the game. We were absolutely dogging these guys, and then all of a sudden we let them right back into the game. They had a quick touchdown, and then Altmaier fumbled, I think, on our first offensive play. Following their touchdown, basically right away, we gave up a fumble that turned into a touchdown. We let up an onside kick, and then they had 2 quick scores. So they scored like 4 times in very quick succession, and it went into overtime, and you really thought this was a classic Illinois football game that we typically lose, especially to Purdue, who we feel like historically, since I've been on campus, we've never played well. But it's nice to see we were able to scrape out the dub and move to 5-1. Cannot believe Illinois football is 5-1. Good teams find a way to win ugly.
Good teams win ugly.
It's good to see.
And especially our sophomore year when Illinois had another hot start, when you drop a tough game like we did to Penn State, it's super common to then just start limping through the rest of your schedule. Obviously, it's hard to get the locker room as jazzed up for Purdue, who had won 1 game this year, as Penn State. And that can become a trap game. So then you take 1 hard loss to Penn State and you string together 2 losses now. You spiral, yeah, and then that can really throw the season off. So obviously would have loved for this game to be not so close, especially against Purdue. It was a total trap game for Illinois, but glad we came out with the win here. Great teams win ugly. To see the offense be able to score 50 points, even if it was an OT, is really something. Overall, ugly win, but a win nonetheless.
Pat Bryant, he had our touchdown in overtime, 4 catches, 104 yards. He is absolutely phenomenal. I think he has 7 touchdowns this season, I think. Yeah, 7 touchdowns, 450 yards, 27 catches. He is playing fantastic.
So Illinois is now 22. So we went up 1 spot.
Man, we really own that 25-20 markets place. That's
kind of
all
our
us.
Spot.
Yeah.
Well, so now this weekend we play 24 Michigan at home, then go to number 2 Oregon at Oregon. If we win both of these games, we're top 10. We're in the top 10.
Oregon, who just beat number 4 Ohio State. Has beaten Boise State. They are looking pretty
Oregon looks
good. That's going to be a real tough game. But, hey, why not us? You're going to have to go through Luke
I still think
Altmaier.
Oregon looks weak. They had that bad first game against Idaho. They played Boise State, who's a good team, very close. The only game that they've really stood out, they handled Michigan State and UCLA and Oregon State, I guess. But they've played a lot of these games pretty close. So I think we have a fighting shot against Oregon.
Yeah. And then the last piece of news we have is actually this morning.
This was breaking news.
Absolutely breaking. Davante Adams was just traded to the New York Jets.
Wow.
After the Jets lost last night on Monday Night Football to the Bills and the Raiders lost to the Steelers this week, Davante Adams, who has been asking for a trade for a couple weeks and has been in trade talks for a while, finally reunites with Aaron Rodgers, his old Packers buddy. I wouldn't say it's surprising. I mean, it makes sense. I'm sure Rodgers really influenced this decision. And with a quarterback as old as him, your timeline is pretty narrow. You've only got maybe 3 more years or 2 or 3 more years. So you think, why not go for it? But I'm excited to see how he plays. I think it'll be cool to see. It's ever since Davante Adams went on the Raiders, he's been less fun and kind of just a void. I just don't watch Raiders games. And the Jets this season have about 100 primetime games. So it'll be more exciting to see Davante Adams back. Connor, what do you think? What do you think of the move?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting move for sure. Yeah, the Jets don't have a huge timeline going on right now. They have Aaron Rodgers. They're not kidding themselves thinking that they have 5-year window with Aaron Rodgers. It's probably, honestly, 2 years with Rodgers, and then he seriously considers retirement or he just straight up retires. So I think the season that they have going on right now, they have the talent that they could be a dangerous team. I think they are a dysfunctional organization, but they're kind of spiraling with this recent bad loss to the Bills. And I think to inject some momentum into the team to get some positive energy going, I think this is a fine move, especially for a third. Obviously, it could be a conditional second, but I don't mind the move that they make there. You've seen that Mike Williams isn't necessarily the guy who can slide in as their 2. So to now have Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams, I think is a really dynamic roster that they have there with Breece Hall coming out of the backfield. I think there's a lot of weapons there that can really be talented. It's funny that Davante Adams, his hamstring issue, I assume will clear up pretty quickly now that he's been moved. Yeah. But overall, I don't hate the move. You need to try to take advantage of what you have right now. It would have been better if they still had their head coach. That is just setting up the Jets for not a great rest of season, but you're trying to take advantage of the window that you have. You saw an opportunity with Davante Adams. It seemed like it made a lot of sense, and you made that deal go through. And at the end of the day, it's a third if he plays poorly. So I don't hate it. As a fantasy manager of Davante Adams, I hope it works out because Davante has been a little frustrating. It'll be kind of fun to see the duo back together. Obviously, it sucked as a Bears fan watching them destroy us, but at least they're in the AFC now, so they can be a little farther away from them.
So one of the games they dropped 9-10 against the Broncos and then lost by 6 to the Vikings. So, I mean, you flip one of those games, now you're 3-3. And you just got one of the best receivers in the league. This game, you had 2 receivers, Lazard and Garrett Wilson, both had over 100 receiving yards. Breece Hall rushed for over 100 yards. There's a good offense here, and the Jets' defense is one of the best in the league. It's kind of confusing how they can't put it together. You feel like it's just a result of being a dysfunctional organization. Maybe with the presence of Davante Adams and Rodgers' sure willpower, he can find a way to salvage the season.
That really would be something if they can make a playoff push.
But moving on to the main beef of this episode, we've got our little interview with Conor Cunningham right here.
It's me,
our co-host. I'm going to be asking you some questions about the 2024 Chicago Marathon. What kind of went into your training? What motivated you to even run a marathon? And what you thought of the race? Things that were going through your head, a little bit of post-race action, and then looking a little bit ahead, what's to come. Well, Conor, just to get started, when you think about the marathon, what motivated you to want to run that race? Where did you start with your running? What kind of got you into running? Why are you into running? How did we start this journey?
Yeah, for sure. So in high school, I ran track, I did short sprints, and I played football. And since graduating high school, a lot of people can relate to this. You just don't have the same athletic or competitive outlet as you do in high school. So finding something that you can be competitive at, that you can train and put time and effort into was really valuable to me. And I think I found that with running, where you can make incremental progression every time you go for a run. So I started running the summer after my senior year of high school. I think for that entire summer, I was pretty much just doing 2 and 3 mile runs. And then from there, it became apparent that when you train for a goal, it becomes way easier to train. So you're not just running miles and submitting miles into the abyss. So that started me getting into half marathons, doing the Champaign half marathon with you. And then from there, the ultimate goal was always to do a marathon, because I thought that that is a good encapsulation of your arrival as a runner, and also to just prove that I could do hard things and prove that you can take steps towards accomplishing goals. I found out about 1 calendar year ago that I was going to be running the Chicago Marathon, and from middle of October until probably April, I was pretty casually running, just trying to increase my weekly mileage. I did 1 half marathon with you, Pat, in April-ish, and just trying to build my weekly aerobic base. My diet wasn't that crazy. And then about 16 weeks out before the marathon, in June, I started doing the actual training plan, which would include about 1 speed work a week, a middle kind of longish mile run that would go anywhere from 6 to 10 miles. We'd have another speed work. Saturday would be an easy day, and then Sundays would be my long runs. So the long runs got all the way up to 22 miles, very easy runs that we would have. But that was overall the kind of training plan that we had. Once I started the actual 16 weeks, I stopped drinking alcohol. I tried to cut down on my diet as much as I could, just trying to be more carb focused and being more conscious of what I was eating. I didn't eat a lot of cereal throughout that process, which was tough. Ultimately, I came in at 3:56, which puts me about an 8:52 pace for 26 miles. My original goal was running at 3:30, which I obviously did not accomplish. And I think my training was probably the biggest factor for that. I just didn't have enough weekly mileage and weekly fast mileage. I think that was the biggest problem that I have. But overall, I felt very prepared to be able to finish the marathon and enjoy it. So I would definitely change some things about my training plan, but I think I put in a serious amount of work to the marathon, and I think I earned the right to finish the race. But I think I underestimated overall how difficult the 33 hours and 30 minutes would be. But that was kind of my training plan that I had.
With such an intense training plan relative to most people's running experience, you definitely have to really enjoy running. And I think from my experience, one thing I've noticed is that lifting can be very boring. And something that appeals to me about running is that it's more interesting than lifting weights. You're seeing a new environment, running around. It's difficult, and it's kind of hard to fake running. Running 5 miles is going to get your heart going and is going to make you sweat. When you think about your running journey, what appeals to you about like training for a marathon versus like training just weightlifting, and specifically about doing those long runs compared to other forms of exercise?
Yeah, I think one thing that stuck out to me about running was definitely the accountability of it, where if the night before you were out late, you didn't get proper sleep, in the morning you didn't eat correctly or you didn't hydrate correctly, that would definitely show up on the run. And I could so clearly see the difference between runs where I had properly fueled before, properly stretched, and the runs where I didn't, right? You just learn these lessons of accountability and being consistent. It can definitely get boring, especially on those Sunday long runs that you have. At the end of your training plan, you're running for 2.5 or 3 hours on a Sunday, and then also not listening to music when you run. It could be boring, but I think for me, that's also helpful just to be able to clear your mind, not have too much going on in your body, in your thoughts. So I feel like that's another thing that's very helpful, is it can be very disconnecting and very therapeutic. Whereas with lifting, you're not very relaxed when you're lifting. You're just very intense. You're trying to just push weight. So running can be very therapeutic. And finally, I think the progression was the most rewarding, more rewarding than with lifting. There's such a progression that just clearly comes from the effort that you put in that I feel like was very rewarding. So those are some of the things that I really like about running.
I think that disconnection is really important to it, kind of therapeutic or relaxing, especially compared to weightlifting, where you're typically inside with artificial lighting, a lot of music.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not very comfortable, but when you're running, you're outside. I've started to run without music again because I feel nowadays so overwhelmed with my phone, always listening to podcasts and music. I just need time to let my brain kind of relax and think. And I think that's something really great about running. Okay, so moving forward, so we drove up together from Champaign to Chicago on Friday night, got in around 8 p.m., didn't have any hiccups. Saturday, we go to McCormick Place to pick up your packets. Didn't have any issues there. But once we got back and the night came around, that's when we started to have a little bit of some hiccups with the race, where we went to the hotel that you were supposed to stay at to drop you off, and we lost our booking. So we had to kind of scramble to get you a hotel, which I think for a lot of runners would have definitely thrown off my mojo. And you think about that night and then waking up, what was kind of your thought process thinking about the race? And then how did you feel waking up the day of the race?
Yeah, for sure. So Saturday and Sunday, nothing really, or even Friday, nothing had really gone wrong. And I guess with big events in your life, usually something does go wrong. So I guess it was kind of a question of when that would happen. And it was pretty funny just when I tried to check into the hotel. I said, I'm here to check in, and I gave them my name, and they said nothing is showing up. And I gave them the name of my sister who had made the booking reservation, and they said that nothing was showing up. I didn't have any confirmation of us booking a hotel. I just had a text message of Lizzie saying the name of the hotel that we were staying at. So I was essentially just a small boy walking into this hotel asking if I could stay in this room that they had booked to somebody else. That was very unfortunate, but it would have sucked to have to drive from LaGrange Park to the marathon. That would have been very stressful, and I would have had to wake up so early, but I'm glad that we had quick thinking, resourceful thinking in the morning to get that figured out. But overall, it wasn't too much of a stressor. The hay was in the barn. I just had to get to the start line, and it would have been fine. But the day that I woke up for the race, I remember that night I really had a hard time sleeping. I think I woke up 5 times throughout the night. I remember consistently checking my watch, watching the clock get 30 minutes closer to 4:30 when I eventually woke up. But in the morning, I couldn't really eat anything as well. I had been carbo loading the whole week before, so I had just been stuffing my face with pretty much just bananas, rice, and bagels. So in the morning, when I tried to eat another bagel, I couldn't really get it down. I just had 2 cups of coffee and half of a banana. But the mindset there was just a lot of nerves for sure, but more than nerves, just trying to get the job done, because you had been visualizing this event for so long. It was very surreal to see the event actually start to come together, or even leaving the hotel, seeing other runners walking there, and kind of thinking a little bit of Sonder, thinking about all of these runners have had this same experience with training for this marathon. Everyone has put in similar work to me. Everyone probably has the same emotional connection to running and the Chicago Marathon. And to see us all collectively walk towards this start line at night at 5 a.m. to see everybody so passionate about this was pretty inspiring. Overall, was really just trying to stay focused and try to just take the steps that I had been planning for a while. I think 10 weeks out, I had known what I was going to wear to the race. I knew what I was going to eat for my breakfast. I knew how I was going to hydrate and what I was going to drink when I was walking over to the race. So having that plan and just trying to execute that plan was the main goal that I had, and just trying to keep the nerves out of there. But overall, there's just a lot of energy in the morning, really excited, and definitely nervous, but more excited, I would say.
So we get past the morning of the race, you get to the start line, and then eventually, I think about 27 minutes after you were supposed to start, I think, we were tracking on the phone. You're supposed to start at 8, I think, and you started at like 8:30. Mm-hmm. Gun goes off, you start running. Me and the rest of my family caught you, I think, 5 times at, I think, mile 2.5, I think 4, 14.5, 17, and then at the end at 25. I was very impressed with the start of the race, especially like 14, like even at 14.5, you looked so strong the whole way. And I knew you had run 22 miles was your longest run, and you seemed so strong throughout the entire race. From your perspective, when you were running, when did you feel like stuff really started to hit the fan, and you really started to think, when that mileage that you had left, you really started to think about that versus when you were just like knocking them off one at a time?
Yeah, so the first half of the marathon was pretty easy for me. I'll say the first mile that I ran, I probably ran it at close to 9 minutes, just because I had started in the 4-hour corral, which to try to run a 4-hour marathon versus 3:30 marathon, that's a difference in a whole minute of pace. So So it was very difficult to try to pass everybody to get up to the pace group that you're trying to go through. So the first mile, I wasn't able to run correctly. And then it was kind of tough mentally after running a 9-minute mile, which puts you 60 seconds behind, to try to think about, well, how to get 60 seconds back in 25 remaining miles. That's having to try to extrapolate that down and learn how to cut down that time for 26 miles was definitely a roadblock for me. So then the next miles that I was doing, I was running very fast to try to just make up that minute difference as fast as I could. But honestly, the first 13 felt great. I was running pretty much at 7:40 to 8 minutes consistently. Mile 14, I ran at, I believe, under 7:40. So I was really cooking pretty well. I started to fade a little bit after 16. I started to drop more into the 8:15 range. But even through mile 20, I believe I ran mile 20 at about 8:08 pace, which is still a fairly strong run that I was having. So I think overall, if I had continued that pace, I probably would have finished more in the 3:40 range instead of the 3:30. But after mile 20 and after mile 21 specifically, that's when it really started to hit the fan, where I just started to have extremely bad cramps in my legs, where the only time I had seriously dealt with something similar to that was when I had done my triathlon from the summer before, where you're pushing so hard and pushing at a fast pace for so long that you honestly probably hadn't practiced similarly throughout your training block, that my body kind of just started to shut down. And I was pounding as much Gatorade, as much salt, as much water, as much BioFreeze as I could to try to keep my muscles going. But at the end of the day, I would just try, I just would try to continue running, but my legs would freeze up and I couldn't continue going. So it was at the mile 21 through 24, I would say, were the darkest miles that I had, where I really started to get scared that I wasn't going to be able to finish, or I was going to have to walk through the finish line just because my legs were really not cooperating with me. And it was tough to get the motivation to keep going and to go from a spot where I thought I was going to be able to come in at 3:30 or at worst 3:40, where the miles were just so easy. And then in essentially the blink of an eye to be able to be walking through these miles or walking on the course was very hard to deal with and somewhat embarrassing, because you pass all those people who are walking and you think, man, I'm doing so much better than these guys. I'd worked so much harder than these guys. But then you start walking and you think, oh man, everything I had been working towards for a year has been for nothing, right? How I put in all this time and now I'm walking during my marathon. I had put in so much effort and now I'm walking. But it was really not a whole lot that I could have done in that moment. It wasn't necessarily a question of willpower. It's just my legs could not continue going. So I really had to take some time and just stretch out my quads, stretch out my hamstrings, slap as much BioFreeze on there as I could. There were definitely some encouraging fans that would come up to me when I was at the side, keeled over, trying to stretch out my hamstrings, who would give me some motivation. That definitely kept me going, but it was just very difficult to get through those last 6 miles, which everyone talks about. The mile race doesn't start until the 20-mile mark. That last 10K is brutal, which was totally correct. And even though I had gotten up to 22 miles, I'd gotten up to 22 miles at a 9-minute pace, not an 8-minute pace. So I think overall I just wasn't prepared for that fast of mileage. But man, after that first half, I thought I was just going to crush this whole thing and just get it done with. But it was a lot to deal with emotionally. And yeah, it kind of sucked.
Yeah. You famously also don't run with any headphones.
Famously, yeah.
Was there ever a time, especially after that 21-mile mark, where you wished you could have some Chief Keef, some Love Sosa in your mind, or something to kind of get you going? Or did you not even think, you never even thought of that?
The thought definitely didn't cross my mind a whole lot, thinking about my headphones would help me get through this or help get me over my cramps. But looking back, it probably would have been nice to have some music, definitely during some of those uphills or some of those times where I felt like I couldn't continue forward. Music probably would have helped, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't have ran with music for the entire 16-week training period that I had. I knew I wasn't going to run with music. I hadn't practiced with the music at all. Something that probably could have helped, but I can't be too upset about not doing it just because it's not what I had planned for. It wasn't what I was expecting to do. But overall, music probably would have helped, but didn't make too big of a difference.
Okay, sweet. So mile 21, you get through that. Mile 24, 25, 26, and then that point 2, you get through that. You finish crossed the finish line, or what were your first thoughts when you crossed that finish line, or maybe even when you saw the finish line?
Yeah, so I thought I was going to cry when I finished it. Initially, like before I started the race, I thought, oh man, I'm probably going to cry when I cross the finish line, but I didn't cry. I almost cried when I started the race or waiting in the start corral before I ran, just because you've been thinking about it for so long. You've been waiting for this moment for a year. To see all of that come to a head is pretty, you can get emotional from it, but I didn't cry when I crossed the finish line. Definitely more of just a feeling of, thank God I'm done. Thank God I was able to get through the line, and thank God I ran under 4 hours. That was the main things that were coming through my head. And when I crossed the finish line, I definitely was just ready to be done with the day, ready to be done with running. I didn't want to run for a while. I didn't want to think about running for a very long time. The first thing I had to eat, they handed you a beer right away, a tall boy of a beer. Definitely not the right thing to drink right after a race, but honestly, I wasn't even that hungry. My Koros watch said that I had burned 3,600 calories from the race. So I was in a serious caloric deficit, but honestly, I didn't eat that much. I drank that beer pretty quickly. They had some donuts in the end corral that I ate. That was kind of the main things after the finish line. Getting the medal was big, just to have that around my neck. But to circle back to seeing that finish line, that last mile was definitely easier. There was so many fans along the sidelines cheering you on. Let's go runners, finish strong. Or even the strangers that you have on the sidelines when you're stretching or struggling to cheer you on was super inspiring. And then when you see that finish line, because the marathon finishes up, I believe, Michigan, which is the biggest uphill that you've faced the entire run because it's pretty flat. So you're dying going up this uphill. You see the signs that say you have 800 meters left, 400 meters left, 300 meters left, but you can't see the finish line. And then you have 200 meters left and you turn left and there's the finish line in a big red sign. And then that really puts it into perspective that you can finish, because even at 21 miles and 22 miles, you still think, crap, I have 4, 3, 6 miles left. That's so far. But once you see that finish line, you know, this is very achievable. I can get this done. And from there, I didn't walk the last 200 meters. You're able to just get through it. You can just focus on the goal and count the steps that you have remaining. It was very easy to finish once you see the finish line. It was great to get through that finish line. You just think about all the work that you've done, all the time that you've spent, the small or big sacrifices that you've made to get there. And it feels good to just be able to put it behind you and cross that finish line.
So now sitting here, finishing the marathon, now that you're a couple days removed, what do you think are your next hopeful goals, things that you're looking for? I know you always talk about hopefully running an Ironman eventually, but do you see maybe a triathlon coming up next? I know you've already ran one. Do you see another marathon coming up? What has been your early thoughts on what you want to do next?
Yeah, for sure. So I think long-term goal would obviously be to run an Ironman. That would be something that I would really want to do. But I think right now I'm in this zone of running where it's really fun for me right now and very interesting. So Abbott has 6 global marathons or major marathons that they consider, which is the Chicago Marathon, the New York Marathon, the Boston Marathon, the Tokyo, London, and Berlin marathons. So there's 6 Abbott major marathons. So my goal would be to pick another marathon, probably either Berlin or London or New York, and try to run that one next year, or try to at least put in an application to run it. My closest goal will be to run the Champaign Marathon with you, which will be fun to be able to run a marathon with you, because it's very disappointing not to be able to run the Chicago Marathon with you. It'd be super fun to be able to run it with you and to also start to focus on more time goals. I obviously didn't hit the time goal that I had wanted, but looking back, probably was a bit of an unrealistic goal. Didn't train correctly. I underestimated how hard it was going to be. But my next goal would try to be run a 3:30 at Champaign, try to cut down for my next marathon in one calendar year to hopefully more in that 3:20, 3:15 range. Then to continue looking forward and continue to putting time into this where I can go under 3 hours, because that will help me start qualifying for more serious marathons instead of just trying to do lottery. If you can run a qualifying time that's under 3 hours, it can help with just getting more opportunities to run. Like at Tokyo, that's a very hard marathon to just get picked randomly for. It's very difficult for non-Japanese citizens to get the lottery spots for that marathon. But if you can run under 3 hours, it can really open some things up for you. And obviously Boston has a time qualifier of, I believe, 2:55 or 2:53 they need to hit. So that would be a long-term goal. But my nearest goal would try to be to run 3:30 in Champaign and then try to break 3:30 or PR at my next calendar year marathon. But overall, I definitely did not want to run a marathon after I crossed that finish line. You go to sleep, you wake up the next day and you think, man, I could do another one. And the day after, I ordered the Hansen Method, which is a marathon training book that goes a little bit deeper into marathon training. So I'm excited to read that and excited to get back on the horse. You think about all the things that you could do better with your training, all the things that could have been improved, and you just think, I need to run another one, or I owe it to myself to run another marathon. So looking forward to that. But yeah, I think those are some of the next fitness goals that I have. Life goal would be to run all 6 of the major marathons. That would obviously be a very big achievement. I think they say only 6,000 people have done that in the world, have run all 6 of them. I was looking on the Chicago Marathon website, and they have a funny footnote that says if you've ever won the Chicago Marathon, you get an automatic spot in each of the marathons, which I thought was funny that they put that in there on the website, as if somebody scrolling through the website who has won the marathon before would be like, oh, I qualify instantly. But yeah, that would be a life goal to run all 6 of those. There was a ton of international runners at the Chicago Marathon. There's a lot of times where the announcers would say, raise your hand if you're from a different country, or, and there was so much energy there from people from all over the world. I think it would be very fun to be able to travel to do different marathons. So those are some of the goals that I feel like I have.
Gotcha. Yeah, running a race in Tokyo or Berlin or London, all of those would be so cool.
It'd be sick.
That'd be such a cool experience to do. Okay, so then just to wrap up, for anyone listening that's maybe looking to start their running career, what advice would you give to them? Any things that you've learned over the past couple of years, or maybe specifically in this training plan, something that you've learned that you think could help some hopeful runners?
First thing I would say is to just sign up for a race. You don't have to be ready now to be able to run a marathon. You just need to mentally prepare or think about the idea of running a marathon. So I would just sign up for a marathon as quickly as you can. Obviously, give yourself 6 months maybe of time before you start your marathon. Don't sign up for a marathon within the month. But I think the most important thing is to just get a race on the schedule, whether you're ready for it or not. And then that'll help start motivating you, because it's so easy to just run casual miles with no goals and think eventually I'll be ready to run a marathon. You can keep constantly telling yourself, oh, I'm not good enough to run a marathon yet. I'll wait a year when I'm really good at running before I can actually run a marathon. But then if you don't have something tethering or motivating you to do your miles, you can fall off the horse with running. You can put something aside. You can say, I'll take a break from running. I'm not really training for anything. But if you have that accountability of having a race on the calendar, so that every day you wake up and know, man, if I don't run today, I'm not going to be able to finish this race. I'm going to have family members who come and watch me, and I'm going to have to walk across the finish line or drop out of the race in front of them. That's a super motivating thing that you can have and can really help add some meaning to the miles that you have. So I would sign up for a race as early as you can, even if it's not a marathon. Just sign up for a 5 or 10K or half marathon, just to get your motivation going with running. The second piece of advice that I would have is to just start running slower. It's so common for new runners, I feel like, especially me, when I started running, I would only be stuck at 2 to 4 mile runs that I would do, because I was running every mile at 7:30 or lower than 7:15 to 7:30 minute pace. And that can burn you out so quickly. It makes running very not enjoyable because you're constantly out of breath. Your muscles are always tired. And it wasn't until my first 7-mile run that I did that I ran at, I believe, a 9-minute pace, where I really realized how therapeutic or calming running can be. So if you're struggling to get out, just run very slow and don't worry about the time that you're going to come in at. Just try to run for a specific amount of time, maybe an hour or 30 minutes, and don't worry about the timing that you're doing, because when you start running slower, running can become more enjoyable. And the last piece of advice that I would have is try to run with somebody else. So I think, Pat, it's super nice to be able to run with you, to have an accountability partner. You're going to run better. You'll have better paces, but also an accountability partner to help get you out of bed in the morning. Or when you feel like you're too busy throughout the day, you think, oh, running's not that important today, I have other bigger things going on. Having somebody to motivate you to actually get the run in is super helpful. So those are some of the tips that I would have. Even if you don't have a twin brother, there's plenty of Facebook groups or Instagram groups or people on Reddit who are willing to run. There's probably a running club in your local area. So just seek that out. But main piece of advice is just to go for it. For running, try to set a goal for yourself, no matter how big or small that goal is. Just try to have a goal, try to sign up for some race, and just start getting those miles off as quickly as you can. Don't delay it. These things can fall behind so quickly. Everything in life can stack up, so try to just get ahead of it early and sign up for a race.
I feel like running a marathon is such a common thing, a bucket list item for people, but actually doing a marathon is so difficult that it's something that you can just always have on that bucket list and never actually cross off, right? Where it takes so much time and effort and a lot of mental to actually complete a marathon. I mean, I've never completed a marathon, but just knowing, thinking that. So it's really something that you just have to agree with yourself that you're saying, okay, I am starting whatever that looks like. Now I'm actually starting my journey. I think that's the most important thing, just getting those wheels turning.
Exactly. You will make time for it if you sign up for it. If you have it on your calendar, no matter how busy you think you are, you will make time for it if it is a priority for you. A lesson in life is that you'll always be tired or you'll always be busy with something. But if it's something that you really care about and you really are passionate about, you'll make time for it regardless.
Well, that's a great way to end it. That'll do it for today's episode of Chicagolandians. We covered some of the Bears news and some of the other news in the Chicago area, but then also talked about Conor's wonderful, wonderful experience running the Chicago Marathon. If you guys made it to the end of this episode, we want to say thank you for listening. And if you really, really enjoyed this episode, why not leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? And if you want more Chicagolandians content, you can find us on most social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter at Chicagolandians. And even though this is a more running focused episode, we still say bear down.
Bear down.